What is the problem that Confucianists define as central, and what's their solution?
Well, the problem is chaos. The problem is lack of social order, that society is falling apart. This is a tradition that emerges at a period when China is sort of lapsing into warring states, and people are worried about society falling apart. And so Confucianism takes its aim at that problem and says, listen, our goal is social harmony. Our goal is social order. And how do you do that? Like, how do you create that? And the answer is ritual. Ritual and etiquette and being kind to one another, virtue ethics. That's what's going to make for a stable and harmonious society. It doesn't really sound all that religious. I mean, and there are some people who say, well, this is really a philosophy or this is an ethic. But underneath all this is the idea that there is an order in heaven, heaven as a kind of impersonal divinity. And what we want to do is bring the heavenly order to the earthly realm. And the way to do that is to act as we're supposed to act toward one another, to do the right etiquette vis-a-vis one another, and to follow a series of rituals that will make us feel close to, empathetic toward one another. And that's the Confucian way of life.
And isn't education also a part of this?
Absolutely. And, Confucius was a teacher. And I have to say that my heart as a teacher really warms towards Confucianism because this, more than any other religion, with the possible exception of Judaism, is the one that really values learning. And it says, look, how are you going to hold a society together with people who don't understand their traditions, who don't understand their history, who haven't read their classic texts? And the answer is you can't, according to Confucians. And that's why learning was so important. Confucius was a teacher. He went around as a kind of itinerant teacher, teaching people to read the great Chinese classics. And that's what Confucianism continues to stand for today.
And when did he live? And what did he was a teacher. I know in the book you compare him actually to Socrates in the methodology that he used, the questioning that he used with his students.
Well, that's right. And he is he's a 6th century and 5th century BC figure in China. So he's around, or he's there around the time of the Buddha, in the sort of what's sometimes called the axial age. The Buddha, of course, is off in India, not in China. But he emerges then, and he tries to get government work. He's never really that successful. He ends up being a teacher who goes around and tells people, listen, we need to cultivate these two virtues. One is called Ren, which is human-heartedness, and the other is called Li, which is translated as sometimes ritual or etiquette or propriety. And the two are related to one another. One is sort of more a kind of fellow feeling, or we might say empathy or benevolence or love even. That's Ren. And then Li is this idea of just doing the right thing in the right situation. And that's what is going to make us human. You become human in the Confucian tradition by being social, by being engaged with one another, by being part of community, not at all through individual freedom, like we think of with, say, the Transcendentalists in America, or like will emerge with the Taoists in China. Mm-hmm. So he's really emphasizing these two mutually reinforcing values of Ren and Li.
Confucianism is sometimes thought of by people as being rather rigid and hierarchical in its norms, in the way it plays out, that subjects submit to rulers, children submit to parents. There seems to be this rigid hierarchical order, and that the ceremonies or the rituals go with it. How do you respond to that description?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, I think that this is probably the most anti-American religion in the book.
Anti-American in what sense?
Well, anti-American, I guess anti-American is the wrong phrase, but un-American. That's where I'm going. Un-American, because America is so much, first of all, about youth, but it's also about egalitarianism. Equality is one of the great American virtues. And Confucianism says that there are really 5 relationships in society. And what keeps society harmonious is everybody knowing their role in those relationships. So you have the ruler and the subject. And the subject should be like a subject, and the ruler should be like a ruler. So the ruler should boss people around and the subject should, bow down and agree. Parent-child is the second one. Husband-wife, older brother, younger brother, and friend to friend. And all of those except for friend to friend are hierarchical relationships where one person's in charge and the other person's supposed to be obedient. This doesn't sound good to us, But and I agree with that. And I think as I was working on this chapter, I did find myself, rebelling against that and sort of listening to the Taoist, critics who are going to emerge of this tradition. But at the same time, there's something really quite beautiful, not only for me about the emphasis on learning that you see with Confucius, but also about, the critique of narcissism. I mean, our Western civilization has really so much become about the self and about the ego. And here's a tradition that says you can't be human by yourself, which as soon as you hear that, it's true, right? I mean, we're all human in relationship. We're all human in community. And this is a tradition that says we have to think about community. We need to be communitarian. And we need that for our ethics to show virtues of human beings in community rather than just people running off and doing their own thing. That isn't a way to have social order, but neither is it a way for us to flourish as individuals.
You point out in the book, though, that Confucius says that those in the superior position in this hierarchical relationship have definite responsibilities and indeed are supposed to be human-hearted in the way they interact with whoever their subordinate is.
That's right. And there is there are debates in Confucianism about to what extent is rebellion against the ruler legitimate if the ruler loses what's called the mandate of heaven, right? If the ruler starts to act as if he's not a ruler, right? There's this interesting idea in Confucianism called the rectification of names, where it says you should act as the role that you are. So if you're a ruler, you should listen to that name, ruler, and you should act like it. If you're a husband, you should listen to it and you should act like it. Now, part of being a husband in Confucianism is being in charge of the family. But also part of it is showing love and benevolence and human-heartedness towards your wife and towards your children. And if you stop doing that, and if a ruler stops doing that, you lose the mandate that you have to be in charge of your family or to be in charge of your society. So there is supposed to be a kind of reciprocity there across those relationships. And in contemporary Confucianism, the relationship of friend to friend is much more being discussed because that's much more first of all, it's traditional, it's ancient, but it's also more egalitarian, right? What is it to be a friend to another person? What kind of obligations do you owe? How does that contribute to human flourishing?
Is there a God in Confucianism, a concept of God?
Well, that's a great question. Let me just say, all right, I'll just say no. But, I hesitated. So first of all, the notions of transcendence or divinity are impersonal. So there isn't a guy or a gal who sits up somewhere and creates the world. Like, that's definitely not what's going on. The forces in the world are more impersonal. They're yin and yang, right? The forces of sort of the feminine and the masculine who interact and create things through their interaction. The notion of transcendence, such as it is, that there's something kind of beyond our grasp, is found here and now, which to me is also fascinating. This is sometimes referred to by Confucians as immanent transcendence, which may be getting us into too many theological terms by two. But the basic idea is that, such divinity or such transcendence as there is in our own human life. It's here and now on earth. And I find this to be beautiful. Instead of looking elsewhere for our exemplars, instead of looking elsewhere for the virtues, look in our own midst. Now that said, as Confucianism develops, it develops something called Neo-Confucianism, which borrows a lot from Taoism and borrows a lot from Buddhism, and it starts to look a lot more religious. It starts to look a lot more like divinities. And you can go to Confucian temples nowadays, and you can see people doing a kind of homage to Confucius that pretty much looks like doing homage to a Hindu deity in a Hindu temple. In other words, that there's a kind of a worship going on of Confucius. So I would say is there a God? In more traditional Confucianism, decidedly no, especially if we think of God as personal. But in more contemporary Confucianism, well, perhaps.
Interesting. Now, there's also nothing, I don't think, reading your book, nothing that we would recognize as a creed, because it is possible to be a Confucianist and to be something else at the same time, like a Buddhist or a Taoist, right?
That's right. I mean, Confucianism is much more a way of life, and particularly a way of living ethically and ritualistically in the world. It's really about ritual and ethics, I would say. Mm-hmm. And there is this idea in China that's really fascinating of the three teachings, where everybody in China, it is said, is a Confucian, a Taoist, and a Buddhist. If you're called up by a pollster, like sometimes happens in America, what's your religion? In China, you'd say, well, you mean one? I'm supposed to pick one? I'm a and there's a saying, you're a Confucian at work, you're a Taoist on the weekend, and you are a Buddhist at death. Because the Buddhists are the ones who deal with problems of afterlife reincarnation that are really ignored pretty much in Confucianism. And Confucianism tells you how to act on a day-to-day basis. It tells you how to act toward your parents. It tells you to work hard. It tells you to be thrifty. Right? It tells you to have those virtues that work in the workplace and in the political space and in the public realm. And then Taoism gives you the freedom to wander off on the weekend up into the mountains. So there is a sort of mutual reinforcing nature of these three teachings, and there isn't a sort of jealous God idea here that you need to pick one or the other.
Mm. And now, what about an afterlife? Is there any concept of that in Confucianism?
Not really. I mean, there isn't. I mean, the idea is that here we are, and the goal is social harmony right here. Mm-hmm. And so unless the afterlife is going to help us with that religious goal and attacking the problem of social chaos, what good is it? Now, that said, as Confucianism develops into something that's called Neo-Confucianism and then the New Confucianism, there is influence from Buddhism. And there starts to be the idea of sort of, well, why should we ask the Buddhists what to do with a dead body, right? Why should we ask the Buddhists what to do with the afterlife? We should have reflection on that too. And Confucians start to do that. But it really is through interaction with other well, not others, but Buddhism in particular, that gets them to start to think about these things.
And what about prayer or ritual? If you went to a Confucian temple, like you said, you might find something that looked like the worship of like a Hindu deity or something there. But what's norm for Confucianism for prayer or ritual?
Well, the ritual really has to do with how you act toward other people. It has to do with things like, we think of ritual as, say, going to a temple and lighting a candle, right, to St. Jude or something, right, or going to Holy Communion. The ritual here, and this is why ritual isn't the best translation for the term li, perhaps. It's sometimes translated as propriety, and that's what I call the Confucianism, the way of propriety. It's knowing what to do in the right situation. It's knowing what to say at a funeral to a friend. It's knowing how to shake someone's hand and look them in the eye. It's knowing how to bow in front of someone who is your elder.
In other words, the rituals of everyday life.
Exactly. It's the rituals of everyday life. It's not rituals around, being nice to the gods, because there really aren't gods. Or at least the gods aren't so important here. The gods are everybody in your midst, and the rituals are oriented toward other people.